Hi, you've reached the Talking Racewalking podcast. It's all about racewalking, of course. It's talking to racewalkers from around the world about racewalking. Join me, Noel Payne, a amateur racewalker in Canada, as I talk to elites, Olympians, record holders, masters walkers, and anybody who's out walking as fast as they can. Hi, so this is a section where I'd actually be talking to someone, a race walker. So this is where you can come in. If you know a race walker, you're a race walker, and you have an amazing story, I want to hear from you. So reach out, let's chat, let's get walking and talking. Welcome everyone to the third episode of Talking Racewalking. On this episode, I have U.S. racewalking coach, U.S. racewalk guru, as I call him, Dave McGovern. Welcome, Dave.
Hey, appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Yeah, no, I think the first few podcasts, it actually gives me an excuse to talk to a lot of people that I came into contact when I was learning to racewalk and reaching out for information. You're one of the first websites that I came across. So racewalking.org, if people don't know. If you're looking for racewalking information, you're probably going to come across it. So this is the guy behind it, and it's my chance to talk to him and get a bit more information about his background and let you hear about it. So I guess the first question would be, where did your racewalking journey start?
Well, I was a runner in high school. I started in junior high, and they in New York tried to have every Olympic event. You know, they didn't have a 50K or a 20K race walk, but they tried to, have, the pole vault and the javelin and thing, hammer, I mean, whatever. I think they might have had the hammer. I don't know. At that point, maybe not. But they were trying to have everything that the Olympics had in terms of athletics or track and field. They had a mile race walk. And in my junior year, toward the end of junior year, there was a guy on my team that did it. And I had run the mile, had a bad race, and I just jumped into the mile walk, kind of making fun of my friend, but also really just wanted to get a workout after that bad race I did. And I got third, but because I hadn't, the coach hadn't handed in the sheets with the competitors, I wasn't on it. I got my points taken away. And as a sanction, I guess they took his points away as well. And we lost the meet by a point or two. And my coach made me do it the rest of the season as a punishment. And then the next year, he kind of talked me into it the next year, my senior year. And, I did it a little more willingly, but I still was I was a runner, and I just happened to race walk. I didn't consider myself a race walker. When I got to college, the guy that had won the junior nationals the year before, Andy Lyles, somehow caught wind that I was a race walker. Of course, I wasn't. I was a runner that happened to do some race walking. But he told me about junior nationals, and that was going to be with the Olympic trials in 1984. And at that point, I found a club that was going to sponsor me to get a free trip out to LA to see the Olympic trials. And so it seemed like, well, this is a worthwhile pursuit. And somehow I got second there, and I got a free trip to the Bahamas for the junior Pan Ams. I got third there. The guy who won wound up, eventually winning the World Cup in a couple years later. Carlos Mercenario, he wound up, obviously Barcelona silver medalist in the 50K. At some point, I started making teams and traveling, and it seemed like it was a worthwhile pursuit after a certain period of time. I wasn't just a runner who was race walking anymore. I became a race walker after maybe 3 or 4 years and a couple of international teams later.
I think it's a really interesting sort of journey into race walking. I think it highlights one thing I've noticed, which seems to really divide things here in Canada, and I think the States as well. As you mentioned, the school program had race walking in it.
Yeah.
In Canada here, it really only exists in one province in the West. So in British Columbia, there's race walking. It almost does not exist anywhere else in Canada in terms of the school program. I think in Alberta, it might be trying to get it in, but it really doesn't exist as part of the school track and field program. We don't see it. And I think in the States, if I'm not mistaken as well, it's sort of hit or miss in terms of at the high school level where kids are even exposed to it.
It's mostly miss. In Maine, it is throughout from dual meets up to the state meet. New York still has it for girls indoor throughout the state. Outdoor, there are certain sections that do it, and then for boys, I think it just doesn't exist at all anymore. We're hoping that we can kind of get it rolling again. Don Lawrence is hopefully take the lead on that. I've heard. If he needs help for me, I mean, I'm certainly willing to help. But Bruce McDonald years ago, when I was race walking, he's the one that kind of got it started, and Bruce passed away a few years ago. It just seems like a lot of coaches are against it because they lose a meet because the other team has race walkers, and then their solution is let's get rid of race walking instead of let's learn about race walking and get some race walkers. Their easy solution is just let's get rid of the thing. So it might be a little bit of an uphill battle to get it back. South Texas, I know AC Jaime had gotten a really strong program. I actually went down there and did a clinic for about 120 coaches. So they had it all over from middle school and high school, at least in the gym classes. But really, Maine is the only place that has it throughout. We've got obviously clubs will have it, and then competing all the way up to the AAU or the USA Track and Field, nationals, and then even internationally. But as far as high schools, really where things are at, we don't have it. And then go beyond that, and they're mostly, kind of in Maine, New York, and then in college it's NAIA schools. So the NAIA schools are mainly in the Midwest, and so we have this. I wrote did a talk at the USATF annual meeting, about this unbroken chain where we've got, or this broken chain where we've got walkers here and then walkers here, and then once they're in the NAIA, they're doing a 5K and they've got to jump up to, at that point, 20K and 50K. We don't really have a cradle to grave system like Australia, let's say. They've got clubs that have kids who age into the junior program, who age into senior, who age into masters, and they've got one club that has all levels. We don't really have anything like that here.
Yeah, I agree. I think the what I see in North America, I think in general, is that sort of lack of young race walkers, or exposing people at the young age to even just the concept of race walking, the sport itself, the opportunity to try it. And you mentioned the college.
Well, I know you're using North America as shorthand for U.S. and Canada, but we can't forget Mexico. And Mexico has—
That's true.
They do have that kind of cradle to grave system.
That's right. It's like it's U.S. and Canada. Yeah.
Yeah, they teach it in the gym classes, and then the kids that are good, they support them at the local level and the state level. And then the kids that are the best go on to train at the Olympic Training Center, and they get small stipends early on. But then these kids are living in poverty, and they're supported and getting not just uniforms, they're getting fed, they're getting a place to live. It's a really enticing thing for a kid growing up in poverty to be an athlete. And obviously they've got heroes dating back to '68. They've got people to look up to. Where we've had Larry Young, Olympic bronze medalist in '68 and '72, but that's not the same as having a score, dozens at least, of Olympic medalists throughout consistently since '68.
No, you brought up a great point. I've got a friend now in Canada, actually, who's originally from Mexico and grew up experiencing that program. Right. And so I can't forget what I say often. North America, and I forget, of course, our southern neighbors. But yeah, and you can see in that example where it's not exactly, doesn't require huge amounts of money, but just sort of it requires a system. So I agree. And the United States has the university or college race walking, whereas Canada, once again, we have a little bit, but it's not across the board availability for race walkers. So it's an interesting problem.
Well, Jerry Dragomir showed what one guy can do. Yep. Who's in the right place. Tim Seaman in the U.S., in the right place. Became a college coach and took his cross country runners and Nick Christie was a pole vaulter,
exactly.
Some other things, but kind of taught everybody how to race walk. And it's not like dozens, but every year or two he gets somebody that makes it to nationals. Jerry Dragomir, Evan Dunphy, and go down the list. Most of Canada's great walkers in the past dozen years or so from Jerry's program. You mentioned a Canadian Mexican race walker, Arturo Huerta, was one who grew up in that program and made a couple of Olympic teams for Canada.
Yeah, exactly. I think you see how, if we look outside of where we are, you can see that other countries have systems that are set up that allow people to be exposed to race walking. And I think in Canada and in the United States as well, the big community is the masters race walkers who take up it oftentimes after, they don't want to, they want to find something other than running or something lower impact. And it creates a very strange environment where it's a lot of older race walkers and not much below them. So it is a problem. But I don't want to.
I think we've lost a lot of older walkers as well. COVID was real tough, and I don't want to knock power walking at all, but I mean a lot of older walkers have found that power walking is easier, and a lot of the meets are in power walks now, and a lot of them want to compete there, and they don't really want to mess with the rules of race walking. And then I hate to say it, but I don't know if pickleball has become a thing in Canada, but
it unfortunately has.
It's taken a lot of our athletes. It's kind of the same pool, older athletes looking for something fun to do. I don't know. Maybe pickleball seems like more fun than race walking, but we've lost a lot. We've lost a lot of walkers to pickleball.
Exactly. That's another discussion entirely. But I want to get back to you as well. So I mean, you got into race walking. You really enjoyed it, and you did quite well as well. What are you doing now? I mean, you're one of the people that I've noticed out there that is really promoting race walking. You're doing clinics. What has driven you to keep that passion for the sport?
Well, early on, I just did not have good coaching. My high school coach didn't really, he wanted the points, but he didn't really have much interest in race walking. When I got to college, the coach there didn't really have any interest in race walking. I was self-coached for quite a while, and I just got into coaching. And as things progressed, I was, I stayed in school. I got several degrees, but I was doing it so I could continue walking. At a certain point, and I kept getting these degrees. At a certain point, I was doing clinics. I started doing kind of week-long camps down at a place in Texas, a ranch down in Texas, that Gary Knoll had, kind of a Healing Springs Ranch. It was kind of a spa. And I was coaching down there. I started doing camps down there. And then I just discovered it was kind of easier. Instead of having 20 people fly into Texas, just one guy would have to fly into wherever I was doing my clinics. And it seemed like it was a lot easier for me to travel. Plus, I was getting frequent flyer miles. So when I did have to go to one of my own races, I'd have the miles to do it. I didn't have to pay for airline tickets. So, I mean, that was kind of a weird way of getting into it. But I started to enjoy coaching more. I started writing books. I got a degree, got a master's degree in sports science. It was actually coaching and sports medicine, and I just couldn't find the time to. I had to do I can't remember how many hours, 800 hours or something, crazy in clinical, and I just didn't have time for that. So I did all the classwork for the sports medicine part, but I never finished that end of it. Anyway, it's a master's in sports science and coaching, and it just became, kind of crept up on me. Became a career. Figuring I would eventually, the other shoe would drop and I'd do something else. And that just never happened. I've got a master's degree from the University of Virginia and started out in environmental sciences, but it became, I got a degree from the architecture school in environmental planning, which it was involved. A lot of it was walkable cities, that sort of things. And maybe someday I'll get into more of that. Right now we're trying to get some more sidewalks and bike lanes around our schools because they're really hazardous. My son, is vision impaired and hearing impaired, and he's got a really hazardous situation if he ever has to walk home from school. So, maybe it's kind of a hobby. I'm using one of my degrees, but I've become a coach without really trying to. But it seems to be what I do now.
It's funny where our passions.
And as I've kind of gotten on in years, I've just found it's a whole lot easier to make other people go faster. I've done some pretty fast times, in my 20s and 30s, and I'm never going to break 6 for the mile anymore. I'm never going to, break 3:40 for a marathon or a 1:25 for a 20K, but I can get other people to achieve their goals much, much easier. And it's almost as gratifying. I'd say in some ways it is more gratifying than doing it for myself.
Well, I mean, I think the race walking world is glad to have you, and especially where, from my experiences, it is hard to find people with experience or who can coach you. They're both in, I'm going to say not North America, but Canada, United States. they're large countries, and so a lot of walkers and race walkers who want to take up the sport really end up learning on their own.
Right.
And even if they find yourself, often it's a distance relationship as well. So there is a lot of sort of learning it on your own with some guidance. So yeah, we're glad to have
I
people
did
who can
pretty well
help.
learning technique from the few videos that were out there. World Cup or Olympic videos.
Yeah.
Every once in a while they put one out, and I kind of modified my technique over the years. Looking at video, I think I've always been more of a technique coach than a training
Yeah.
coach. Obviously, I do both, but I've always had a pretty good eye for technique. And I never put out a video. It just seems like every time I'm about to do that, something else comes along. And Ian Watley just has some really great videos out there. They're not, and actually Ian and I made our own videos. We did the Ian and Dave's low budget racewalk video series.
I've seen them. I've seen them.
Yeah, I shouldn't even mention it because I wish it would die, but they're out there somewhere. But he's put some good videos out using his kids as models. So I haven't really felt the need to put videos out, but it is a great way to learn. Just looking at video, what's out there. A lot of people, come to clinics and they kind of have an idea what race walking is, but they haven't really gotten a good idea because it is, when you're searching on the internet, it's hard to know what's good and what's not good. And
Well,
Carmen
that's
as well. I'll recommend Carmen stuff. I'll recommend Ian stuff. There is some bad stuff out there, but those are certainly good sources.
yeah. I think actually, I mean, there's ups and downs to social media and everything that's out there now, but YouTube is definitely, I think, in this day and age, helped a lot of people figure out what race walking is. It's your books are great, and other sources out there, but when they're static, you can only get a feel for so much in terms of the diagrams and everything else. So yeah, those videos can really help people. And in terms of bit of advice for anybody out there looking at YouTube, when they're, they'll find Ian, you should go find Ian Watley, put that name into YouTube, and Dave as well. Jeff Salvage is another one as well. But what should people be looking for when they look for like videos on YouTube of race walking?
I find it less helpful to have somebody say, do this, do this, do this. Obviously the people in the Olympics know what they're doing. So if you just search out Olympic race walking, and if you can find a way to slow it down, kind of go frame by frame and see what they're doing, at least that's what I did. I mean, I got a pretty good handle on it, and I can certainly, and that's another thing. I mean, I never felt the need to put out a video saying, do this, do this, do this, because I always just told people, look what the elite walkers are doing. And if you're a masters walker, look what the top walkers in your age group are doing. Maybe you can't get your body to do what Jefferson Perez, does, or Evan Dunphy does, but you can certainly look at people your own age, kids your own age, and see what they're doing. But then, good technique, it just has this look to it. It doesn't look like it's high speed hiking. It looks like this really fluid, dynamic athletic event. When you see something, they're doing something different. And sometimes people think that in a negative way. They'll see it and they'll say, "Oh my God, he's running." It's like, well, you don't run with straight legs, but certainly it is athletic. It is dynamic.
No, agreed. So I've got two things. We're gonna wrap this up, and I've got basically two things. First question, which we talked about before we even started this podcast, was I wanted to get your feel on where race walking is going. I know you're vocal with your opinions, which I think is a good thing, because I think some people, you need to have something out there to generate discussion. But with the recent changes in terms of, there's the 50K went away, and then there's a 35K that popped its head up, and now the 35K looks like it may disappear, and we've got a weird marathon mixed relay thing that's occurring in the Olympics.
Clearly, we know your opinion if you're calling it weird.
So yeah, that is my opinion. I would say
I totally agree. I totally agree. It's weird, not productive. It seems like we actually racewalking started in 1904 as part of the decathlon. They had a half-mile walk as part of the decathlon, and they immediately figured out that's not going to work. We got these guys that aren't really well trained, and they're doing this really short event. Let's move up in distance. 1,500 meters. Well, that didn't work. Let's go to 3,500 meters. Let's go to 10K. And we kept increasing the distance. Finally in 1932, they introduced the 50K, and then in 56, the 20K. And that's been status quo ever since, until 2020, we had the 20K and the 50K. Women, for men, And rightly, women have argued, why are we the only track and field event that doesn't have a corollary on the women's side? And they're absolutely right. We fought for that. Women fought for that. And they got it kind of. They came back and said, well, we're going to give you a women's walk, but we're not going to make it a 50. We're going to drop you both down to 35K. And then all of a sudden they started doing these mixed sex relays. So they said, well, why don't we do a 2x35K relay? Fine. Everybody was okay. We're not happy about it. We'd rather have the 50K. It's got a great history. It's 5 miles longer than a marathon. It's a great selling point, but we'll take it. We'll take this 35K. And one of the arguments for not putting the 50K in is that the Olympic Committee said, we don't have enough time to do it before 2020, I think that was. And it turned out they wound up having not just 4 years, 5 years, because 2020 became 2021. But they couldn't put in a 50K because they didn't have enough time. Well, in April, 14 months before the Olympics, they all of a sudden decided, let's do this mixed sex marathon relay. And okay, we'll have 2 men and 2 women doing equally broken down legs of a marathon. Okay, we don't think that's a great idea, but let's go for it. No, it's not going to be 2 men and 2 women. It's going to be 1 man and woman. Well, that doesn't make any sense. That means the man has to do this 10 point, whatever it is, 10.5K leg, and then wait 45 minutes while the woman does her 10.5K leg. No, it's not going to be that. It's going to be an 11.275K leg, and none of the legs even match. At least at the Olympic level in Paris, they're going to have 4 very weird distance legs that mean absolutely nothing, with only 1 man and 1 woman. And one of the main arguments for increasing the distance is because the technique, the people have gotten so fast, it's kind of hard to judge. Well, so then they drop it down to about a 10K. But then it's not just that bad. You've got to rest for 45 minutes and then do another one where you've tightened up, you've rigged up. If you've ever done a 10K race walk, you sure as heck don't feel like doing another one, and your technique doesn't feel like doing another one. And so you come out of the gate and your technique is horrible. And then you got these judges out there. They're setting us up for failure. It's absurd. And I think really it's Olympic Committee decided, let's come up with the craziest thing we possibly can so that we can ultimately say, let's get rid of race walking. It's stupid. Well, it's stupid because you made this stupid event for us. Anyway, that's my opinion. Shoot me. And I'm not, horribly conservative where I don't think there should be change. I'm not one of these old people that's, technique today is horrible. These people are running. I've watched technique evolve, and I'm just so impressed at what athletes can do. I think very recently the judging has changed. I think the athletes over time have done what they could do under the constraints of the rules. I think the judging has changed recently. That last World Championship, I think it was kind of a flying circus, but I think there are plans afoot to cut back a little bit on the flight phase. But I've watched a technique change. I think it's been very interesting and innovative. So I'm not against change, but this marathon relay thing is just crazy.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone in that opinion. I mean, coming from a newer race walker, I've had some conversations with folks who were closer to how the decisions were made in regards to, the 35K. And it was a very strange situation with, I think, a lot of bad decisions where it was like, okay, we've got one event you can put in, so let's make it a relay. And then when it wasn't a 35K, the whole relay, I think there were just some very strange decisions made without a lot of thought about how it would impact the sport.
Well, I think it was based on fear, because it was presented by the Olympic Committee to World Athletics, take it or leave it. Your race walking is becoming, there are too many videos of race walkers and still photos of race walkers off the ground. You have to change it, or we're taking it out of the Olympics. And then they kind of weighed in on how we should change it. And I don't know where this marathon relay came from. That sure isn't, and also the attention span issue. That people don't want to be out there watching a 4-hour event. Of course, we do. Endurance fans love it. But the short attention spans, they wanted something a little bit more, whiz bang. And I guess that marathon relay is, but I don't think that the Olympic Committee had the perspective to know what they'd gotten themselves into, because it really is going to be horrible for race walking. You're going to see more walkers off the ground. The technique's going to get worse, not better. And if it takes place, there was even talk of having this just on the track. But certainly on short loops, and if they're going to try to promote it, that means they're going to get it on television and show it, and probably show it in slow motion, and they're going to see the worst of race walking. So I don't think it's going to help us at all.
No, it's unfortunate. I think the positive side that comes out of race walking too is the fact that it's such a global event. You look at a lot of other sports, it can veer towards certain countries that are really strong, but in race walking, especially at the Worlds and everything, there's such a huge range of countries that are represented in race walking, which you don't see quite that range in a lot of other sports. It's impressive.
I mean, even if you're looking at endurance events, you see the pictures of the marathon, and it's Equatorial Africa. You see the Kenyans, you see the Ethiopians, you see the Ugandans, you see athletes from other countries that originated from Sudan and from Kenya. And there are the occasional athletes from other countries, but you see these pictures of the field in a 50K race walk, and you've got the oceanic athletes, Australia, New Zealand. You've got the Chinese and the Japanese. You've got plenty from Europe. You've got the South Americans. Occasionally, you have a North American. Mexico is North America. There I go. You'll have 5 continents represented. In the top 10. Always, almost always. So it really is this amazing mix, and that's one of the things that they require. The Olympics, when they're adding new events, they want representation, not just. They want representation across the globe. A certain number of federations, certain number of countries and continents represented. And race walking always in the top 10, top 15, top 20 athletes. It's a mix throughout the world. It's not just one country dominating.
No, I agree completely here. Hopefully, some of our listeners as well will generate some thought and discussion about it as well, because I think that's part of what I hope to do with the podcast. Dave, to finish up, I want you to tell me, how can people get a hold of you? I've mentioned the racewalking.org. That's the website. I've mentioned your coaching. How can people get a hold of you? You do clinics as well. Where can people find the clinics, and how can they get a hold of you?
I mean, pretty much if you type in racewalking, I come up pretty quick. But my website is racewalking.org. It's not racewalking.com. That's for sale for, I think, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. And as long as as long as there's been an internet, racewalking.com has been for sale at some ridiculous price. So it's racewalking.org. Or if you just, if you Google, race walking, usually I come up pretty in the top 3 usually.
Perfect. Well, thanks a lot for the chat. And people, if you have a chance, go to Google, hit Dave's name, or go racewalking.org, find out about his books, his resources, his videos, his clinics. Great resource if you're looking to get into race walking. And even if you've been at it for a while, he's got a lot of cool stuff there to help you improve technique and training. So thanks again for the chat, and we'll be in touch soon.
Okay, appreciate it. Good luck with your own walking.
That's it, folks. The end of the podcast. No walkers have been harmed in the recording of this podcast. And of course, at the moment, we have no sponsors or supporters at this point to fund all this amazing podcasting. But if you're out there and have a race walk company that produces some sort of race walk apparel product or something you think race walkers would love, get hold of us. We'd love to have you on board. Give us a holler.